two words consistently over the past 3 years, it's probably these two fabulous words, deterministic and probabilistic models and audience data and so on, because they are completely different ways of thinking about data and about people. And here we have Andrew coming up, CEO of IRI, to talk to us a little bit about how they apply these.
Thank you. I hope those aren't the most exciting two words that you've heard in your life. I really do. I really do. There's been some exciting events going on in the world, elections, sporting events, things like that, that I would imagine are slightly more exciting than the topic that I'm going to cover. But hopefully not. Hopefully not. So I'm going to give you a little bit of backdrop, if you've heard it a dozen times, and then a quick overview of some work we did where we compared the quality of really large big data deterministic audiences versus the probabilistic ones we've had for years. And so you don't have to wait for the punchline because it's actually pretty straightforward. What we found is that our deterministic audiences, which are now based on over 200 million cards, significantly beat the probabilistic audiences in terms of sales lift and in terms of ROAS and in terms of impact. So if you're looking for the highest return, then one-to-one deterministic audiences based on purchase data and other attributes are the way to go. The challenge being is that they don't have the same reach as a probabilistic audience since the data pool only covers about half the population. So if you want to get to the other half of the population that is not in our pool of cards, of which is the largest at this point in terms of number of cards, then you have to append your deterministic audience with the probabilistic audience or projected audience. Did I get that right? I used those two words in like a sentence like 4 times, and I think I got it right. The punchline is you need a little bit of both to accomplish your objectives, but that the audience selection and execution is the largest driver of the return on a campaign. So there's a lot of talk in the world about personalization, complexity, big data, stuff we all know, right? We're in an environment where the average person, and I always take it back to simple things, right? A year ago I was talking to our conference, and the day before I called up my 2 kids and I said, how do you guys make decisions? Like, what drove you to buy the makeup you buy? They're 14 and 16-year-old girls, but at this point it probably wouldn't matter. So what drove you to make those decisions? How did you make those decisions? How did you, and it was all about, first of all, they never actually spend any time with their parents anymore, and they don't watch TV the way we do, and they're up in their rooms watching on their iPads. And so how they get exposed to things that drive purchase decision and the ultimate behavior that we want, which is where people shop and what they buy, our friends, social groups. One of them said that they asked their friend, nobody asked their mom, by the way, or neither of them. And frankly, the number of inputs that they got was high, right? And there was a lot of trial and a lot of input. And that's just indicative of this crazy world of expansion and explosion of information, right? So this is, tried and true. You guys have all seen this. The marketing ecosystem is extremely complicated. There are, thousands of intermediaries, including ourselves. And most of the stuff doesn't work very well. So, and conferences like us, we spend a lot of time talking about how to figure out who saw what. So there's a multi-billion-dollar industry that goes on to just figure out what exposures do people have to what stimuli that will drive their behavior change, right? And we spend billions on it. And we try and build ecosystems like this one, which we've built. So we our mechanism for solving this problem is actually not that complicated, right? Because we just have a core belief that the ultimate reason why you spend money on ads and promotions, whether you're a retailer or whether you're a product company, is to drive a consumer to take an action. And that action in our simple world is they either go buy more of something or they go visit a particular retail store or particular website and they buy more often and have a bigger basket. And so the entire kind of IRI philosophy on media and the media world and advertising is what combination of all those different data assets using, algorithms, machine learning, anything, but just getting all that data together in one place on one platform. We've spent the last 2 years, and I think are up to 2 trillion rows and 150 million people's worth of data that covers TV, digital, social, all these things around an individual, and what are the characteristics that get them to go from 100 to 175 on buying. And so as a setup to this kind of audience selection thing, our view is the single most important thing that drives the sales lift and drives the behavior you want as a promoter or as an advertiser is the selection of who sees how much of what. So audience selection is really important. When we look at the underlying factor for sales return, what you're going to see is there's a lot more variation across, well-selected targeting versus non-well-selected targeting than there is across, Facebook and Google. So when we look at ad type, ad placement, demo, et cetera, and then we look at a purchase-based audience versus a non-purchase-based audience, the use of the purchase data and the history and the projections in the audience overwhelms many of the other variables that are driving the impact. So I completely agree with the prior speaker that you have all this input and all this optimization, but that is the last 25 to 30% of the impact. It starts with understanding the audiences and getting the stimuli in front of the right people. And that's what the results are going to show. And it's based on this ecosystem we've built. So all the results you'll see of sales lift, deterministic versus projected, are based on complicated models that factor in all these other exposures. And so we've amalgamated, just so for context, what's in there for the study is, 250 million cards. We have access to all of Rentrek's household data, 150 households of mobile data, et cetera, every store, every coverage, all of the IRI causal data that we've had. We track 400,000 stores. We track what's on display. And in order to, and we do it around a kind of 360 view as we start to build out what today is about measurement. For us, it starts right at the base of insights. We take this panel that we've had forever of 100,000. We throw in all those other data sets, FSP, et cetera, and we understand more about consumer purchase intent because we're not just using purchase data, we're using all the other characteristics that we've been using for decades. And that establishes the audience, and then the audience is then created using either deterministic or probabilistic, and then we do the lift stuff, which I'll go through just to validate the way in which we did the study. So for us, it starts with understanding the consumer, and we just announced a whole module that's basically got all these different data sets in it that allows you to understand how each and every one of these attributes affects future purchase. And at some point, we were talking to someone in here last night, it would be great to have brand metrics as well. So it was a short-term and a long-term effect. But for us, given our history of what drives purchase, it's obviously natural that we would have amalgamated the richest set of purchase data in a single platform around the country by far, and then built an end-to-end solution from insights through audiences, which is what we're here to talk about today. So we have our projected audiences called Pro Scores. We have now over 200 million cards that we can pull from actual purchase data, deterministic audiences. And what this fancy picture says is we have an on-the-fly ability to basically mix and match those audiences in real time. So you can take a projected audience, you can determine what percentage, what's the cutoff point, you can take a deterministic audience, you can add in a television viewing factor, you can add in their purchase history of unrelated products, you can add in whether they ate at McDonald's in the last month, whatever it is, the credit card, purchase, Pro Scores, all that's in one platform and one piece of soup that's effectively then selecting the audience. And then the way we did the study is we use what's called our Lift platform, which we've spent the last couple of years building. And what makes Lift different than traditional test and control is we're factoring in a whole bunch of other things that drive sales lift. And the easiest example, as I say, is Coke's $1 and Pepsi's 90 cents. You don't want to attribute the advertising to Pepsi because those price gaps drive sales lift. So you got to factor out the price difference before you look at the impact of advertising. If you were already likely to go buy a bunch of cereal in our case, the ad isn't what's driving it. It's the fact that you're just a heavy cereal buyer. And so in order to do this modeling right, you need to get to the marginal impact for all those different attributes. And that's the first circle. We'll go through the decompose. We can slice and dice them in lots of different ways. We have engineered this as a real-time platform, so we're now the only organization that can deliver you the results in the middle of the campaign within 3 or 4 weeks once there's enough purchase history because there's a time lag. And it's highly dynamic, which I'll show you some examples. I'll skip this one. This is the last one on methodology. The reason we are excited about the Lift platform we've built is because it's just more accurate than historical models. So, and because, frankly, we're the only organization that could have pulled this off because we're the only ones that have the data sets on price gap analysis, causals, weather, competitive price. You can see all the things I talked about, right? Most measurement companies are just using grocery data. We can project to all outlet using our panel of 100,000 people, so it makes it much more accurate. We do it at the individual household level. We can look at the impact of coupons. We can look at the impact of competitive price. We can look at the impact of weather. We can look at the impact of by holding out people's purchase propensity, et cetera, et cetera. So we get a model that's got an R-squared of 70 versus a grocery only of about 30. And so that's what makes, we think is what makes this study of verified versus probabilistic audiences highly accurate is because it's based on the same Lift platform. So to get to the punchline, I kind of already hit it, right? We looked at 6 campaigns, a lot of cereal, but a couple others that weren't cereal. So it was a lot of cereal, but we looked at others that weren't cereal, and they looked a lot like cereal. So, and then we had this highly sophisticated methodology called we collected the data, we matched the data, we created groups. I was told this was a technical conference, so I made the team put in this chart so I could look like I'm like one of those data scientists. So this is my data science chart. Look. It's got words like Anakova on it and stuff like that, which I don't think is the tennis player. I think that has something to do with statistics. But if you have questions about that, Bono's back there. She did step 5. I did the other ones. I did all the matching. It's amazing what CEOs do these days to make a buck. So we did a bunch of cool stuff. We would traditionally present it in a cool dashboard that gives you all the measures. I think this just gives you a sense of the level of depth that we can provide in terms of measures. We used sales lift for this one, but we have return, penetration change, dollars per occasion, all those big 5 on the top. For any campaign, or the ones you can look at the underlying key drivers, and then you can benchmark it against it. But to get to the key takeaways, both approaches have their usefulness. The deterministic verified audiences have a much higher sales lift compared to the projected audience, somewhere between 50 and 900%. You'll see the numbers. However, they're limited by the fact that even as large as the pool is, of 200 going to 300 million cards, you still get to 50 to 60% of the population. And so, at least until Walmart and Amazon, but particularly Walmart today, puts their data into our pool, Walmart heavy buyers will always be a projected audience, to keep it simple. Which we have projected 10,000 brands to every household in the US. So it's easy for us to take a deterministic audience for this half and then layer in a projected audience for the other half. So this is kind of the evolution of accuracy, and we bring it all together into one platform. These are the results. So the relative sales lift of cereal was very good for deterministic audiences. So that would be takeaway number 1. If you're trying to get to people that buy cereal, they're easy to find through their purchase history. And there must not be that many of them because they're very focused. Whereas other categories like chili and water, it's still 4x and 127, and there's one category where the projected audience was the same as the deterministic audience. But don't ask me why, because then we'll have to get Banu on stage to explain why. But there were reach differences, just given the scale of the purchase-based audiences. And so you'll see there's some correlation between the sales lift of a one-to-one audience and the reach. My guess is that it's easy to find a subset of the population that is a high buyer. But if you really want to get reach, because those deterministic audiences are narrow, then you have to use a purchase propensity model to look at the other proportion of the population. But remember, these are all holding price gap, holding people's propensity. So one of the important things we do is we're only looking at the marginal impact for people who have the same expected annual purchase, which is our PRO score. And then putting it all together, if you were to rerun this campaign and run a mix, so use the verified for the half and then project for the other, you'd actually end up with a 4x return on sales. I'm going to skip this one because it's about data, so it's really exciting. And then I think there was some talk, and then I'll do Q&A. There was some talk in the last discussion about machine learning, AI, and figuring out what drives the underlying behavior in real time. So especially in categories, things like Mercedes-Benz, where it's a long-term purchase, you obviously have thousands of touch points when you go back to that spider diagram. And the way we approach the ability to drive sales lift or whatever penetration is we wanted to build a platform that allowed the user, the ad buyer, or the agency to make adjustments using data along the way, purchase lift data. So there's lots of adjustments, I think, listening to the evolution of programmatic and the automated way in which they're trying to shift the purchase along the way. But in the end, if you believe that the objective is to drive behavior change called purchase, and you can get these types of measures, those measures of sales lift, return, penetration, cut on the fly by ad size, placements, target type, publisher, frequency, demographic. These are just examples. So in the Lift platform, we're able to, on a weekly basis, evaluate all the key measures against all these cells, right? So you can look at, you can look at an ad on this publisher with this placement to this creative to this group. What was the sales lift of that relative to the others? And then the system actually already has an algorithm at the back for optimization. So you can literally rebalance your campaign just by pushing a button once a week, and that's going to rebalance that campaign from the average, sales lift of the population. So let's say your ad return is 1.5 and your sales lift is 30%. You just push a button and reallocate it to the higher return and projected return, and you can double the return over the balance of the campaign. So we have lots of examples where a $500,000 campaign might have generated $800,000 of sales. But if you run the optimization starting, let's say, a third of the way through, you can generate 1.2. So that's pretty good if you're spending 500 grand and you're getting another 400 grand in sales out of the campaign just by optimizing on sales lift and creative. So with that, it says 0. Does that mean 0 as in debt completely done, or 0 as in time for questions?
Maybe 1.
Just 1?
Yeah.
Do I have to ask it, or do I answer it?
Let's see if you have any takers. You have one over there.
I was confused because there were 2 counters over here.
Are they deterministic or probabilistic?
One's going up, which probably should have been a hint. It was the wrong one because it was going up. The other one was going down.
So we had a question over there.
Hello. Hi, my name is Jamie Kinney. I head digital for the Broadcast Audience Research Council in India. I had a question about the data sets you use for Lyft. Outside of direct buyer behavior, what was the data set that you guys had that found to have the biggest impact in understanding sales lift? And is there a data set that you guys currently don't have that you think would be the biggest additional help to understanding sales lift?
Yeah, I think the one, so if you said the core for most of the campaigns today is loyalty data, so frequent shopper data, then I think the data set that is most valuable in projecting that up is our panel of 100,000 people where we know everything that they buy, because what we do is we take the 70 million households in the FSP and we basically look-alike match them to a household for each category. And so that ability to do it down at the category level versus just, by person on the fly versus just a rule of thumb, Walmart's 30% of sales, that adds like 60%, to the R squared. I think the other big innovation was the price gap. And then the third one is that we're already factoring out a likelihood to purchase using the pro scores, which are basically, funny enough, the probabilistic audience. So that we're only looking at the marginal benefit per decile of expected purchase. So those 3 things is what drives the accuracy. About 70%, most of the improvement from a 30 R squared to 60 or 70.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, sorry I went too long. Thank you.
So perhaps what we value the ARF most for is being this independent